Well, hello, I'm Josh and I'm back once again with another great film to tell you about. And it's another Orson Welles film this week, and it's one of my favorites. I'm talking about his 1948 film noir classic, The Lady from Shanghai. The Lady from Shanghai follows Michael O'Hara, a sailor who is hired on as a crew member of the yacht of famous defense attorney Arthur Bannister after saving his wife Elsa from a mugging. And right from the start, he is surprised to find that Elsa seems to be much more infatuated with him than with her own husband, though it is soon not hard to see why. Along the way, they pick up Bannister's creepy law partner Grisby, who fears the atomic bomb and, wishing to get out of his marriage, hires O'Hara to help him fake his own death and collect on the insurance. So as I said, this was directed by Orson Welles, and until he made Touch of Evil in 1958, this was pretty much the last film that he made in Hollywood, aside from his very low-budget adaptation of Macbeth. The story behind it was, after the troubled release of The Magnificent Ambersons, where Welles' ending was destroyed and reshot while he was out of the country, Orson Welles was having difficulty making movies. He ended up doing a film called The Stranger, which starred Edward G. Robinson, just to show that he can make a movie on time and on budget. And though the film was quite successful, possibly his most successful ever in terms of box office revenue, it was also his most conventional, with fewer of the stylistic flares that he was known for. But regardless, it got him back in good graces with the studios. But soon after, Welles was in need of more money to help pay for a stage production of Around the World in 80 Days that he was making. And so he went to Columbia exec Harry Cohn to hopefully direct another movie. As Welles tells it, he was calling Cohn from a phone booth, and when asked if he had any particular story that he wanted to tell in mind, he grabbed the nearest book off a display case and read it off as, "It's The Lady from Shanghai." And then when Cohn asked what the story was about, he turned it over and read the synopsis on the back. Cohn apparently liked what he heard because he greenlit the film on the spot, and that's how the film got made. Or at least that's what Orson Welles says. It's a little inconsistent whether or not that is a true story. In reality, the novel the film is based on is actually called If I Should Die Before I Wake, so right off the bat the facts are a little inconsistent, but it's kind of a fun story nonetheless. And Welles actually had a collaborator on this film that you might find a bit surprising, that being low-budget horror film director William Castle, known for pioneering all the various stunts and gimmicks found in many of the horror films of the 50s, with movies like The Tingler and 13 Ghosts. But at this time, Castle did not have the reputation for horror films that he would later acquire, and looking to direct his first feature, he was most likely the actual one who found the book that this was adapted from, and brought it to Welles and eventually worked on this film as an associate producer, along with being an uncredited writer. And Castle even kept a journal on the set, which chronicled a lot of the troubled and crazy history of this film. Much like most of Welles' films, the production was filled with disasters, whether it be on set or in editing. For starters, there was apparently around an hour of film cut from the preview, so needless to say, the current film, which runs around 90 minutes, is a little hard to follow. On top of that, Welles recalled the studio insisted on using process shots for many things that they could have easily gotten when they were out on location. And there are some incredible locations in this film, but their mix with the process shots end up giving the film this disjointed feeling, which certainly doesn't help the story feel any more coherent. But it does end up giving the film this odd sense of being a crazy nightmare where feeling and emotion are emphasized over logic. You can't help but identify with O'Hara's confusion and fear, not too unlike that of Joseph K. in Welles' later adaptation of Kafka's The Trial. And the cinematography in this film is just great. Welles was largely known for his dramatic camera angles, and here it feels as if you are almost stepping into another world. And that is a big way Welles separated himself from other filmmakers. Where one might shoot two people talking by a cliffside in profile, allowing the viewer to see the beautiful nature around them, Welles brings the camera above the actors looking down and unnaturally close, giving the viewer the unsettling feeling that they just might go over the edge. And while most people would shoot close-ups with a long lens to compress the image and make the actors look their best, Welles shoots several of them in a wider lens which distorts to give a larger field of view. This can often make an actor feel unsettling in a relatively subtle way that you may not catch on to your first watch through. He certainly does it more subtly here than he would later do in films like Touch of Evil, but I mean, just look at how close he puts the Grimsby character to the lens. His face almost completely fills the frame, and on top of that, he is so sharply in focus and lit with such a hard light that you can practically see every pore and bead of sweat on his face. Contrasted with Welles and Hayworth, who, though often just as close, are shot much softer, which was a common technique used in movie star close-ups back in those days. But they shoot Grimsby in such an unsettling way that you immediately feel like you need to back away from him, so your mind just instantly picks up that this guy is creepy. And the cadence actor Glenn Anders uses for his voice certainly doesn't help either.
Would you kill me if I gave you the chance? I may give you the chance.
Another interesting aspect of this film is where it talks about the atomic bomb and the paranoia over the destruction of the world.
It's coming, you know. Oh, yeah.
Which is especially fascinating when you realize this film came out only a couple of years after the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and the concept of nuclear annihilation was very new to people at the time. And there is also a really memorable scene in an aquarium where Welles and Hayworth are filmed in silhouette, further creating this dreamscape. At some moments, they are clearly walking through a real aquarium, but while she is reading the letter, the fish Hayworth walks by seem to get bigger and bigger until they are completely massive. And later on, Welles puts a very oddly satirical spin on the courtroom scenes in this film, which almost feel like something out of Dr. Strangelove, with sneezing jurors, a sleeping audience, and witnesses questioning themselves on the stand.
Yes, Mr. Baxter.
And none other than Erskine Sanford as the judge. The whole court feels like some farcical nightmare, once again evoking these paranoid feelings of Kafka. And though very little of this film has anything to do with Shanghai, there is a very nice though brief scene in Chinatown which shows a side of San Francisco rarely seen in classic Hollywood, including some traditional Chinese opera. But of course, one of the most iconic scenes of the film comes towards the end in the Hall of Mirrors. I don't want to go too into details in case you haven't seen this one, but I'll just say that there is a reason why this is considered to be one of the most visually striking scenes in film history. Apparently, there were a lot more rooms in the funhouse, designed and painted by Welles himself, which were shot but later cut out by the studio before the film's release. So in short, though sure there are plenty of technical aspects and heavy re-editing that keep this from being as great as it could have been, it is still an incredible film that's impossible for anyone who watches it to forget. Even for someone who watches a ton of film noirs, I can safely say that there is truly nothing else like this one, though you can certainly see its influence in a number of films, TV, and even video games that followed. And so to talk about the cast, like many of Welles's films, this one is filled to the brim with fantastic and kind of off-the-wall performances. I mean, Welles to start, though his Irish accent is often criticized, it's pretty interesting to see him play more of a dumb tough guy role here. With all the twists and turns, he makes some pretty naive choices that may have you scratching your head, but his confusion just helps push along this dreamlike sensation that much of the film rides on. But he's not completely clueless either, as he gives this great speech to Mr. Bannister and company about sharks attacking each other, which is clearly a thinly veiled dig at them, and turns out to be far more accurate than any of them realized. showing that he really had a decent sense of them all along. Rita Hayworth is great as Elsa Bannister, giving one of her best performances, maybe only just behind Gilda. And she was actually married to Orson Welles when they made this film, though they divorced shortly after. And at the behest of Columbia studio head Harry Cohn, Welles had her iconic long hair cut and bleached, which gives her a very distinct look for this film. Everett Sloane is another wonderful actor who really gives an unforgettable performance here. Combining his unnerving cadence and 2 walking canes, Sloane can't help but stand out as Arthur Bannister. Apparently this idea came from the fact that Sloane was primarily a radio actor who worked with Welles in his Mercury Theater, and so he had a hard time adding physicality to his role. So Welles thought of the canes to give him a more distinct walking gait. And I already mentioned Glenn Anders as Grimsby a bit, but he also creates this very memorable but off-putting performance, just saying his line in weird ways that you're unlikely to ever forget. One other actor who mainly keeps to the background but sticks around through pretty much the whole film is Gus Schilling as O'Hara's friend Goldie. And he was another of Welles's collaborators who pops up in several of his Hollywood movies. And despite having relatively few lines, you always seem to recognize him whenever he shows up. So if you want to watch The Lady from Shanghai, it's available from all the usual sites as a rent-or-buy option, and I believe I've also seen it streaming on YouTube, so you can check it out that way as well. And if you want to get the film physically, there are quite a few options for that as well. It's been on DVD for quite a while, and there's also a pretty solid Blu-ray from Mill Creek that you can pick up for not much over $10, I don't think. But if you want a bit more with it, you can also pick up the film from Kino Lorber like I have here. And this version comes with several bonus features, including 3 commentaries and some interviews, including one with TCM's Eddie Muller, as well as the late Peter Bogdanovich. And both of them really break down the crazy history behind this film that I didn't have time to fully cover here. So if you're interested in any of that, this Kino Lorber version is probably your best option nowadays. But to be honest, the Mill Creek version is actually not too bad either. But now for my comment question, and I'm wondering, what is your favorite film with flaws? And you don't have to think of this as a guilty pleasure per se, but one that swings big and has a lot going for it, though undeniably comes with some rough edges, whether they be studio mandated or because of some other factors like low budget. But whatever you choose, put it down in the comment section below and start discussing. Hit the like button if you enjoyed this video, and subscribe if you want to see more of these. Remember to keep watching movies, and I will see you again soon.
Give me the wheel.